The presentation file was gone. Not moved. Not renamed. Not accidentally dragged into the wrong folder. Gone, scrubbed clean from the shared server at 2:17 a.m. Every backup copy deleted with the kind of precision that didn't happen by accident and didn't happen without someone who knew exactly where to look. Emma discovered it at 6:45 a.m. standing at her studio desk, still in her coat, coffee in hand, the day not even properly started yet. She had come in early specifically to run the final quality check before the board presentation in 4 hours. She had set her coffee down, opened the server, typed the file name, and watched the screen return nothing. She typed it again. Nothing. She sat down slowly. She opened the backup directory. She opened the secondary backup. She opened the emergency cloud sync that her IT manager in Atlanta had built specifically for situations where the primary systems failed. All of it. Gone. She sat very still and looked at the empty screen and felt something move through her that was bigger and colder than panic. Panic was loud. This was quiet. This was the specific feeling of understanding exactly what was happening, and knowing that whoever was doing it had planned this moment carefully. They had waited until the last possible hour. She picked up her phone and called Jian. Jian answered on the second ring, already awake, already at her own desk. Emma. I was just about to call you. The server. I know, Emma said. How long ago did you notice? 20 minutes. I've been trying to reach the building's IT department, but nobody is picking up, and the overnight log shows the deletion happened from an internal terminal. Emma, this wasn't external. This was inside, Emma said. I know. Silence on the line. Jian. Emma's voice was completely level. I need you to call every member of my team right now. Everyone comes in. We are rebuilding this presentation from scratch in 3 hours, and we are walking into that boardroom on time. From scratch in 3. Jian stopped herself. Okay, yes. I'll call everyone now. Good. Emma ended the call. She stood up. She took one long breath. She picked up her coffee, took a slow deliberate sip, set it back down. Then she opened her personal laptop, the one that had never once touched Bong's network, and started rebuilding. Welcome to Black Silk Stories, the home of Afro-Korean stories that hit different. Subscribe, drop a comment, and do not go anywhere. This is only the beginning. By 8 a.m. the studio looked like controlled beautiful chaos. For members of Emma's team were spread across every available surface. Laptops open, render programs running, reference images pinned to the design wall in rapid organized clusters. Emma moved between them like a conductor, never raising her voice, never showing the particular quality of fear that lived underneath her focus like a river under ice. She directed and decided and rebuilt with the particular clarity that only came to her when everything was on the line. Jian appeared at her elbow at 8:23 a.m. There's someone at the door. Emma didn't look up from her screen. Tell them we're closed this morning. Emma. Jian's voice had a different texture. It's him. Emma looked up. Through the studio's glass front wall she could see Bong standing outside the door in a dark charcoal suit. Alone. No security, no assistant, no entourage. Just him, standing on the pavement with his hands in his pockets, looking directly at her through the glass with an expression she had never seen on his face before. He looked like a man who already knew. She crossed the studio and opened the door. The presentation file, he said before she could speak. Gone, she said. We're rebuilding. I know. He reached into his jacket and produced a USB drive, holding it out to her. My personal system runs a parallel mirror archive of everything on the project server. Completely separate network. Whoever deleted the files didn't know it existed. He paused. No one knows it exists. Emma looked at the USB drive. She looked at him. Something was moving in her chest that she didn't have a name for and wasn't going to name right now. She took the drive. How long have you had this? She asked. Since the article, he said simply. She understood then. He had been watching. Not passively. Actively, deliberately, building a quiet safety net underneath her without telling her it was there. The article. The timeline changed. All of it had been telling him something, and he had been preparing for the next move before it landed. You knew it would escalate, she said. I suspected, he said. I hoped I was wrong. Emma turned the drive over in her hand once. Then she looked up at him directly. You should have told me. Yes, he said. Without defense. Without explanation. Just the clean acknowledgement of a man who knew he had made a choice that wasn't entirely his to make. She held his gaze for a long moment. There was something between them in the morning air. Something that had been building for weeks, layer by careful layer, and was now pressing against both of them with a weight that was getting harder to categorize as professional. Come inside, she said. We have a presentation to finish. Something moved in his eyes. Something quiet and certain. He followed her in. The presentation was ready at 9:47 a.m. 13 minutes to spare. Emma stood at the front of the studio and looked at the rebuilt deck on the main screen, and felt the particular satisfaction of a thing made under pressure that was better for having been broken first. The rebuild was sharper, more specific, more undeniably hers in every slide and every choice. Her team sat around the table looking exhausted and electric at the same time. The particular expression of people who had just done something they hadn't believed was possible. Bong stood near the back wall and said nothing. He had been there for 2 hours, not interfering, not directing, not performing helpfulness. Just present. Occasionally he had handed someone a coffee from the tray that had appeared from somewhere without announcement. Twice he had caught Emma's eye across the room in a moment between decisions and held it for exactly 1 second. Steady, certain, like a hand placed briefly on a shoulder. She had felt both of those seconds in places she wasn't discussing. Let's go, she said to her team. Then she looked at Bong. Ready? I've been ready, he said. They walked out into Seoul together, the morning bright and indifferent and alive around them, and Emma carried her rebuilt presentation like a weapon she had sharpened herself and was not afraid to use. The boardroom was on the 11th floor. 7 board members sat around a long glass table when Emma walked in. 6 men and 1 woman, all Korean, all carrying the composed evaluating expressions of people who made large decisions for a living and were comfortable with the weight of that. Emma had presented to rooms like this before. She knew how to read them, who leaned forward when they were interested, who crossed their arms when they were unconvinced, who looked at their phones when they had already decided. She set up in 3 minutes. She stood at the head of the table. She began. She was 4 slides in when the boardroom door opened. Jae-won walked in. He was carrying a folder and wearing his most trustworthy expression, open, apologetic, the performance of a man interrupting reluctantly for important reasons. My apologies, he said smoothly, moving to the empty chair at the far end of the table. Board scheduling conflict. Please continue, Ms. Reeves. Emma looked at him for exactly 1 second. Then she looked back at the board and continued. But something had shifted in the room. She could feel it. The way 2 of the board members glanced at Jae-won as he sat down. The way he gave them the smallest nod. The way the energy in the room recalibrated around his presence like a room adjusting to a new temperature. He had allies in this room. She had known it was possible. Knowing it and feeling it standing in front of a room were different things. She pushed through slide 5. Slide 6. She was building to the centerpiece, the full design vision for the headquarters, the piece of work she was most proud of, the section that would make the decision undeniable. She clicked to slide 7. The screen went black. Not a glitch. Not a technical failure. The screen went black and stayed black with the particular finality of something that had been made to happen. A ripple moved through the board members. Someone shifted in their chair. Someone cleared their throat. Emma stood at the front of the room in the sudden dark silence and felt the eyes of 7 people and 1 enemy on her and did not move. She did not look at the screen. She did not look at Jae-won. She looked at the board members directly, one by one, and when she spoke her voice filled the room like it owned it. The Meridian Hotel lobby in Dubai, she said. Raw concrete against hand-blown Murano glass. Everyone told me it wouldn't work. She moved away from the dark screen and walked slowly along the side of the table. No slides, no visuals, just her voice and her knowledge and 14 countries worth of built things behind every word. The Langford Residences in Singapore. The client wanted something that felt like money. I gave them something that felt like legacy. There is a difference and I can explain exactly what it is. She stopped near the center of the table. I don't need the screen. I know this work because I made it. Every choice, every material, every calculation of how light would move through a space at different hours of the day. I know it because it came from me. She looked at each face at the table. And I can stand here and tell you exactly what I intend to do with this building. Every floor, every surface, every moment of walking through a space and feeling like it was built specifically for the person walking through it, without a single slide. The room was completely silent. She talked for 20 minutes without stopping. Without notes. Without the screen. At the far end of the table, Jaewon sat very still with his folder open in front of him, and his face carefully arranged. But something had gone out of his expression, something he had been counting on that hadn't landed the way he planned. When Emma finished, the room was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then the woman board member, who had not moved or shifted or looked at her phone once, leaned forward and said, "Ms. Reeves, when can you begin?" Emma walked out of the boardroom at 12:34 p.m. She walked down the corridor, turned the corner, leaned her back against the wall, and closed her eyes for exactly 5 seconds. Her heart was doing something loud and relieved and furious all at once. She let it. 5 seconds was what she allowed herself. Then she opened her eyes. Bong was standing at the end of the corridor. He had been in the room, seated against the wall as the client, silent throughout, and he had left 30 seconds before her. He was standing now with his hands in his pockets, looking at her with an expression that she had never seen on his face before, and could not immediately name. It looked uncomfortably and completely like pride. "You didn't need the screen," he said. "No," she said. "I didn't." He was quiet for a moment. Then, so quietly she almost didn't catch it. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you about the archive." Emma looked at him. Really looked. The way she looked at rooms, reading what was underneath the surface. What she found in his face was not the composed control she had grown used to. What she found was something unguarded. Something that had come forward while he wasn't managing it. "Why didn't you?" she asked. He was quiet for a long moment. "Because telling you meant explaining how closely I had been watching," he said. "And I wasn't ready to explain that." The corridor was empty around them. Seoul moved beyond the windows at the end of the hall, bright and indifferent and alive. Emma felt the weight of everything Unsent pressing against the inside of her chest. "We need to talk about Jaewon," she said. "Yes," he said. "We do." The audit report hit every board member's inbox at 2 p.m. Emma didn't send it. She didn't have to. Bong had given it to his legal team at noon with 3 instructions: thorough, clean, and fast. And by 2 o'clock 7 board members were reading a document that laid out, in precise and complete detail, exactly what Shin Jae-won had done, exactly when he had done it, and exactly which tools he had used to do it. The fabricated article. The stolen design collective research that had been handed to a journalist with specific instructions on which projects to reference. The board timeline that had been moved without authorization. The server deletion at 2:17 a.m., executed from his terminal under his credentials, with no attempt at external framing because he had not believed he would ever need one. He had been that confident. That was the part that sat in Emma's chest with the particular weight of something that needed to be acknowledged before it could be released. Not the damage he had done, she had rebuilt from that. Not the deliberate targeting. She had stood in front of a boardroom without slides and won anyway. It was the confidence. The absolute certainty that she could be dismantled quietly, and no one would look too closely at the seams. She thought about every woman who had ever walked into a room and been underestimated by a man who believed his position made him untouchable. She thought about the letter she had written to no one. She thought about how much had changed since then. Jaewon was escorted from the building at 2:47 p.m. Emma was not watching from a window. She was not in the lobby. She was in her studio on the 6th floor, standing in front of the full design wall she had built over 5 weeks. Every floor of the building mapped out in material samples and light studies and spatial calculations that represented the best work she had ever done. She was looking at it the way you looked at something you had almost lost and hadn't. Jiyeon appeared in the doorway. "It's done," she said quietly. "He's gone." Emma nodded. She kept looking at the wall. The board chairwoman called. Jiyeon continued. "She wants to issue a formal statement clearing Muse Studios' name. She asked what language you'd like them to use." "Tell her," Emma said slowly, "that I'd like it to say exactly what happened. No softening. No corporate language." She turned from the wall. "The truth doesn't need to be managed. It just needs to be said." Jiyeon smiled. the wide relieved smile of someone who had been holding their breath for weeks. I'll tell her exactly that. She left. Emma turned back to her design wall and stood alone with it for a long quiet moment. She thought about Atlanta. She thought about the apartment where she had started this company with a laptop and 2 clients and more belief than evidence. She thought about every room that had tried to make her feel like a visitor in her own life. She was not a visitor. She had never been a visitor. She was the architect. The formal statement from the board went public at 4 p.m. By 5 p.m. it had been picked up by 3 industry publications including Seoul Design Weekly, the same publication that had run the original article. The retraction ran at the top of their digital front page with a directness that Emma suspected had been strongly encouraged by people with more influence than a mid-tier industry journal could comfortably resist. Her phone started moving at 5:15. Messages from clients in Dubai, Singapore, London, Atlanta, people who had watched quietly and were now saying loudly what they had always believed. Camille called from Atlanta laughing and crying at the same time, and Emma sat on the edge of her studio desk and let herself receive all of it without reclassifying it or filing it away as irrelevant. She had earned this. She was going to feel it. At 6 p.m. she sent one message to her entire team. 4 words. Dinner. My choice. Tonight. The replies came back in seconds. She smiled at her phone in the empty studio and felt, for the first time in weeks, the particular lightness of a weight that had been set down. She was the last one left in the studio at 8 p.m. The team had gone ahead to the restaurant. Emma had stayed behind to finish one thing. The final material specification sheet for the 7th floor. A document she had been building around for days because getting it right mattered more than getting it done. She sat at her desk in the quiet of the empty studio with Seoul going full dark outside the windows and her design wall glowing softly under the studio lights. And she worked with the particular piece of a person who had nothing left to prove and was simply doing what they loved. She was deep in the specification document when she heard it. The studio door opened. Not the way it had opened that first morning. Not with the particular sound of a door not asking permission. Not filling the frame with black suits and authority and intimidation. This time the door opened quietly. A single set of footsteps. Unhurried. She looked up. Bong Seokjin was standing in the doorway of her studio. No charcoal suit. No navy suit. No tie, no armor, no performance of power. Dark trousers and a simple gray shirt, collar open, sleeves pushed to the forearm. No security behind him. No assistant beside him. No phone in his hand. He looked like a man who had put down every single thing he usually carried and walked out of his building with nothing but the decision to be here. He looked for the first time exactly his age. Emma set her pen down slowly. She looked at him across the studio, the design wall behind her full of everything she was building, the city full dark through the windows, the quiet between them holding the weight of everything that had happened since the first morning he had stood at his window and not turned around when she walked in. "You're not in a suit," she said. "No," he said. "You came alone." "Yes." She looked at him for a moment. "How did you know I'd still be here?" "I didn't," he said simply. "I came anyway." Something moved through her chest, warm and wide and final, the feeling of something arriving that had been traveling toward her for a long time. He crossed the studio slowly. He stopped in front of her desk 3 feet away, and looked at her the way he had looked at her letter, completely without rushing, giving it its full weight. "I have been many things in this city," he said. His voice was quiet. Not the quiet of controlled authority, the quiet of a man speaking carefully because what he was saying mattered and he wanted to get it right. "I have been necessary. I have been feared. I have been useful. I have been, for a very long time, exactly what this city needed me to be." He paused. "I have not been known. Not really. Not by anyone who didn't need something from me in return for the knowing." Emma was very still. "You wrote about the way I stand at windows," he said. "You wrote that you notice the way I look at you when I think you aren't watching. You wrote that you were afraid of what you were feeling, and that you had no intention of saying it out loud." He looked at her steadily. "And then you saved the document by accident and changed everything." "I know," she said softly. "I want you to know," he said, "that I read it and I sat at that window until 3 in the morning and I thought about what it meant that a woman who builds spaces specifically so people feel seen had looked at me not at what I represent or what I control, and written that she saw something worth feeling something about. Emma felt her throat tighten. She held his gaze. "And I want you to know," he continued, "that everything I did after that, the coffee, the cleared floors, the archive, all of it was not strategy. It was not management. It was the only language I knew for something I didn't have words for yet." He paused. "I have words now. Tell me," she said. "You are the most extraordinary person I have encountered in 32 years of living in a city full of extraordinary people," he said. "You walked into my building and you saw the ceiling was wrong and you told me so. You took a phone from my security team's hand without flinching. You rebuilt a presentation in 3 hours and stood in front of a boardroom without a single slide and won the room with nothing but the truth." He stopped. "And you wrote in a letter you never planned to send that you wished I would treat you like you mattered." His voice dropped to something very quiet and very certain. "Emma, you are the only thing in this building that has ever mattered to me in the way you mean." The studio was completely silent. Seoul moved outside the windows, dark and vivid and relentless, the city that had been the backdrop of all of this without ever knowing it. Emma stood up from her desk. She walked around it slowly and stopped in front of him, close, real, no desk between them, no professional distance, no careful reclassification of things that were not irrelevant and had never been. She looked up at him and he looked down at her, and between them was nothing but the truth of two people who had been circling something real for weeks and had finally completely stopped. "You know what the worst part of writing that letter was?" she said. "Tell me," he said. His own words back to her. "I meant every word," she said. "And I was furious about it." Something broke open in his face, warm and real and entirely unmanaged. Not the corner of the mouth acknowledgement she had been collecting. Not the rare full smile she had seen twice. Something deeper than both. Something that had been waiting behind all of it for the right moment and had decided. In this quiet studio with the design wall behind her and soulful dark outside, that the moment had arrived. He reached up and touched her face, one hand careful and certain, his thumb brushing her cheekbone the way someone touched something they intended to take care of. "I'm not going to manage this," he said quietly. "I don't know how to do this carefully. I only know how to mean it." "Then mean it," she said. And he did. Later, much later, Emma stood at the studio window with a cup of tea going warm in her hands and looked at Seoul the way she looked at buildings she was about to transform. Finding the bones. Reading what was underneath. Understanding what a thing could become if you gave it the right conditions and enough belief. Bong stood beside her. Close enough that their arms touched. He was looking at the city the way he always looked at it, like it owed him something, but there was something different in it tonight. Something that had loosened. Something that had been set down. "The redesign," she said. "Still yours," he said. "All 12 floors. All 12 floors." She looked at the city for a moment. "I'm going to make it the most beautiful building in Seoul." "I know," he said. "You were always going to." She smiled at the window. He saw the reflection of it in the glass and something settled in him, quiet and permanent, the feeling of a thing finally in its right place after a long time of being almost there. "I saved the letter," she said. "The original. I went back and saved it properly after everything. I don't know why." "I do," he said. She looked at him. "Because it was the truest thing you'd written in a long time," he said. "And true things deserve to be kept." Emma looked at him for a long moment. This man who had read her most unguarded words at midnight and chosen, quietly and deliberately, to respond to every single one of them without saying a word until he was ready to say all of them. She turned back to the window. Seoul blazed below them, vast and indifferent and alive, the city that had been the stage for all of this without ever caring about the outcome. She cared. He cared. That was enough. That was, in the end, everything. The letter had been written to no one. It had found exactly the right person. And in a design studio on the 6th floor of a building that was about to become the most beautiful in Seoul, with the city burning outside the windows and 2 cups of tea going warm on the desk, something that had started as an accident became, quietly and completely and without any further apology, a beginning. This is what Black Silk Stories was built for. 2 people. 1 letter. A city that didn't care and a story that did. If this lived inside you, if you felt every slow burn, every charged silence, every moment they almost said it and didn't, then you are exactly who this channel was made for. Subscribe. Share this with someone who deserves a story this good. Drop a comment and tell us the moment you knew. We have more stories where this came from, and every single one of them hits different. Stay close. You found your home. Black Silk Stories.